monthly colloquia series that is sponsored by the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Policy. And today we're going to have Cynthia Buettner present to us. And she is a associate professor in Human Sciences Administration here at OSU in the College of Education and Ecology. I got that right, didn't I? Okay. She earned her PhD here in HDFS. And she's also the director for the Ohio Collaborative, which is a research center and policy center focused on conducting and disseminating research for improving schools and the lives of young children. Her publications in the last 2 years have focused on teacher preparation and attitudes towards teaching and teachers' well-being, also on the effects of parental depression on child school readiness and the quality rating improvement system on child cognitive development. So that's just a small sample of her work. I believe you've also done some work on school writing at the college level, which I thought was really interesting. College students and rioting.
Oh, rioting, yes.
Yeah, so,
college drinking.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, I read a few of those.
I just moved younger in terms of risk behavior.
Yeah. So, we're very excited to hear her presentation today. Normally we would have refreshments for you, but we had, Panera didn't deliver today, so we're just going to have a presentation. So.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks for a great introduction. Thank you to Laura and the Crane Center staff for sponsoring these sessions. And thanks to all of you who came out on I was going to say snowy afternoon. It was snowy when I was thinking about this, but it seems to be cleared up a little bit now. But I know it's the end of the week, and people are already thinking about the weekend, so I appreciate the fact that you came in to hear me talk a little bit about research that I'm pretty passionate about. So hopefully I'll be able to give you some things that you can think about over the weekend. I'm assuming that if you're here, that if you came to this session, that you have some interest in early childhood care and education. And if you are interested in early care and education, you probably know that there's a fairly robust body of literature that says high quality early childhood education has positive benefits for children. What I think a lot of people aren't as aware of is that we don't have that much high quality care in the US. We know it's important, we know it makes a difference for all children, particularly those from vulnerable backgrounds. But we don't actually, as a country, now I'm getting into a political thing, invest, I think, as much as we should in early childhood education. So that's led to a number of efforts by states, efforts at the national level and at the local level to try to improve the quality of care in the early childhood system. And I kind of use system loosely because we don't really have a system. We have centers that are for-profit, we have centers that are non-profit, we have public entities that are providing child care, we have private entities that are doing so. We have different regulations in every state as to what's okay, what the standards are. So we don't have a system for early care and education like we would for K through 12. But these efforts have, I think, initially focused on what is termed structural quality. And those are things that are easily measured, and they are things that are easy to set standards for. So think about group size. How many kids can we have in a classroom? The ratio of students to teachers. So structural quality has focused on things that are important not only to kids, but also to the people who work in the system. You don't really want to have 32-year-olds in your classroom. So they're important things, whether we can actually tie every one of them to better outcomes for kids. They are good for the situations that we put children into. But when we look at the how, what really makes a difference in kids' outcomes, then we have to look at what happens between the teacher and the child. So we look at teacher-child interactions. And that's typically in the literature referenced as process quality, that process between teacher and kids. And so we kind of talk about both of those things. I think of structural quality as the things that sort of set up the opportunity to have good interactions between teachers and children. Sorry. But when we pull out the teacher, thanks. I'm sorry, I came down with a cold yesterday, so I'm struggling with the cough. When we think about the teacher as the architect of the classroom, and we think about things that might impact that quality of interaction that the teacher has with the child, there's a fairly robust body of literature about where people have looked at education and credentials. What do teachers bring to the classroom to start with? How have they been trained? Traditional professional development, sort of what we think of as going and taking a workshop or a particular training. And then more recently, there's been a fair amount of effort in interest in coaching. So actually delivering training to teachers in the classroom, mentoring them, and modeling behavior. But there's a number of people who've pointed out that there are other things that teachers bring to the classroom that might affect their interaction with children other than I'm going to talk about a construct that we've labeled social emotional capacity. I guess you try to work as a researcher to get to the place where you can label some sort of construct, and that's what we're operating on, the folks that I've been doing research with. And that's what we use to guide our work. And there's just a brief model, we'll come back to it later. So personally, for a long time, I have collected stories about how couples met each other. I like the story that people can tell me about how they got to where they are now. And once I got into the academic world, I have transferred that to asking people how they got on the path that took them to study what they're studying at any moment in time. So what's the path that led you to be interested in this? So I'm going to try to walk you, I've tried to organize this a little bit about the path that I've been on that took me to focusing on this particular area of interest in terms of quality education for kids. And that started because I had a large data set that had come from a research evaluation that I had done of Ohio's quality rating and improvement system. If you're familiar with Ohio, it's called Step Up to Quality. And that's an effort to set standards to try to, it's a voluntary system, or at least it was when I was looking at it, to try to get centers in child care centers to improve. So I had this data set that included assessments of children. We had observations of the teachers in their classrooms. We used the classroom assessment scoring system, or the class, developed by Keonta and others. And we also had data, surveyed parents, and we'd surveyed teachers, and we'd surveyed directors, and we had the quality rating systems. We had this really nice data set. And at the same time, still am, and was at that time PI on the virtual laboratory school, which is funded by the Department of Defense, and we are developing an online professional development training system for the 34,000 people who work in early care and education on military bases. So that work led me to spending an awful lot of time with in child care centers on military bases and talking to the folks who were working there. And we talked an awful lot about the stress that many of the kids in those classrooms were under. You know, they had the multiple deployments that their parents had had over the last 12 years. And so teachers were working with kids who might have stressors that most children would not have. And there was sort of a double whammy to think about in those classrooms, because about a third of the teachers in those classrooms are military spouses. So they may also have been facing having their spouse be gone and be deployed, and they were trying to cover being both parents to their child and still maintaining things at home, and then being in the classroom with kids who might also have those kind of stresses in their life. So that led us to think about teacher stress quite a bit, more than I've ever thought about it before. And among our group, we thought, well, let's look at our QIRS data, because we thought we had some things that we could measure stress, and we also had this other data that we thought we could look at. So we thought we'd try to look at quality and stress together. So that led us to the first paper I'm going to talk about, or study 1. And we used a person-centered approach in terms of the analysis. We did a latent profile analysis in this study. And we had 3 subgroups that came out of, this is a thing, I'm not a statistician, so describing how to do this, I kind of feel like you put everything in there and you see what belongs together, and then you can actually form these groups of people that have common characteristics. What goes together? Are you?
Your profiles are crazy.
My profile, oh.
That blue one?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. It's lots of fun. So we had these 3 subgroups. The first one, let's see if I can make this come up. The first one we labeled high competence, low distress. So if you look right here, these three items here are the domains on the class. So this group up here, the gray group, they scored pretty high on the classroom quality measurements. They were fairly satisfied. You can see their stress level was under control, and they were pretty committed to their to the profession. That's what we measured. How well or how much commitment they had to keeping that job, staying in the early care and education. The second group that came out of the analysis, my fingers aren't making this happen. There we go. Was the group that we labeled high competence. Actually, I think when I switched around and I gave these guys I didn't get my corrected one back up when I saved it for the guys, the film crew. But this is a group we actually call good competence, high distress. So see good here instead of high. But they're not bad. They've scored fairly well on the 3 domains of the class, a little low on instructional support, which seems to be pretty common. Instructional support is usually where people are not very good. But their satisfaction with their job is really low, their stress is really high, and their commitment to what they are doing is very low. So these would be people that you might be expecting to be thinking about moving out the door. The third group that appeared was the group, the low competency, low distress. These are the people who weren't very good and they weren't worried about it. Their satisfaction level with their job is pretty high, their stress level is pretty low, and they're committed. They're happy enough that they're not thinking about leaving. So this, of course, as you can imagine, because you're all laughing about it, this is the group that we spend a lot of time talking about. Like, how do we, what do we think about this group of teachers? And so, you can think about it. We thought this is what we came up with. You can kind of think about it in 2 ways. That they are either have a lack of awareness of the fact that they aren't particularly good in the classroom, or it could also be one thing that we found was that we looked at help-seeking skills with all of these teachers, and if you had high help-seeking skills, you were far more likely to be in this low competence, low distress group than you were in the group right above it. So, we don't know that maybe the fact that they're not particularly stressed and they're not particularly unsatisfied is because they've gotten really good at working with others. They have relationships and they know how to seek help and they know how to survive. This is clearly one of those places where it's great to say we'd like to do more research on this and kind of try to figure that out.
I'm sorry, when by stress do you mean stress in the job or stress at home? How did you define stress?
We had a couple of different scales. So we just measured their stress in general. We put it all together. So stress at home, how stressed do you feel? That's the sort of scale that we did with that. So that led us to study number 2, which actually wasn't done with any data that I had. This was done with the Fragile Families data set, one of the large federal data sets. And we looked at teachers' depression and found that it was directly and indirectly related to teacher-reported external externalizing and internalizing behaviors of children. And we found that in this case, classroom quality was measured by the ECHRS and by the family child care environmental rating scale. So the same thing, only some of the kids were in center-based care, some were in family-based care in this data set. Even when we controlled for family influences, you know, mother's depression and everything, we still had these findings that children's depression was linked to children's behavior problems. So at this point now as a team, we're really focused on this link between what's happening with the teachers in terms of their psychological well-being and how that plays out with children. And so we kind of looked at the literature around early childhood education and teacher psychological characteristics. And so I just have a couple things here to sort of highlight things that we found as we kind of looked at things that might be explaining what we were seeing. And you can see here in this, up here in this one where we have prevalence rates of depression, that in the general population, depression among men is about, at any given time, about 6%. Women tend to run higher. There are typically more women, higher rates of depression among women than men. So in the general population, the depression among women is about 10%. There was a study done of Head Start teachers, pretty large sample, a little over 1,000 teachers in Pennsylvania, done by Robert Whitaker on depression among Head Start teachers, and the prevalence rate that he found among Head Start teachers was 25%. So 1 in 4 teachers were in the classroom with kids, and they were struggling with their own depression. We also know from other people's research that the prevalence rates of stress are pretty high. About half of all teachers report being stressed, and then about 25 to 30% of all early childhood education teachers are reporting that they are very or extremely stressed. And we also know that turnover is really high in early childhood education. The average rate is about 35%, and among people who are in the first 5 years of their work as a child care worker, the rate is about 46%. So in addition to this issue of high turnover, which means making sure that people are well trained, you also have the problem of difficulties in continuity of care. These kids are having multiple caregivers that are taking care of them because of this high rate of turnover. And I think it's pretty easy to hypothesize that this might be related to stress we're seeing there. Oops, too fast. Okay, so I have a few graphics that came from a report that was put out by Whitebrook and Phillips and House. And they had originally conducted the National Child Care Staffing Study, and so they kind of went back to the issue of what are the issues that are facing early childhood teachers. And so you can see in this table the child care workers who were making in real 2013 dollars were making $10.20. In 1997, they're now making $10.33. So they're really not seeing any great growth in terms of what they are earning. But what I want to bring your attention to is that they make less money than non-farm animal caretakers in terms of an hourly wage. So the person who takes care of your dog when you go on vacation typically makes more money than the person who's caring for our children on a daily basis. Preschool teachers do a little bit better, but child care workers, and we all know from research that 0 to 3 is really critical. They're being paid pretty poorly. What I found interesting, this doesn't quite speak to my stress level, except my outrage level, is that this shows you that under basically the same period of time, the amount of payments that families are making to child care has gone up tremendously. So the teachers in the classroom aren't making any more money, but the people who are paying for child care are paying a lot more for it. This is a graphic that takes you salary of teachers by student age grade level. This is in 2013. Child care workers are down here at $21,000 a year. And you can see that that puts them $10,000 a year less than a preschool teacher, and that preschool teachers make another $20,000 less than folks who are teaching kindergarten. So we, despite the fact that we know how important 0 to 5 is, our money in terms of what we will pay people to care for those children and to educate those children is far less than when they suddenly turn 5 years old. We value them more, or we value the people who teach them more. Okay, and then finally, let's see if I can. This is in a study of more than 600 early educators. They asked them about what they are worried about in terms of their economic security. And sort of heartbreakingly, 48% of them said that they were worried about having food for their family. And another 73%, almost 3/4 of them, were worried about having enough money to pay their families' monthly bills. So we have folks, again, who are having to worry about very basic human things, who also are spending all day caring for children with these stresses in the back of their head. And then finally, this is another one about what they are worried about in terms of employment policies. They are worried about 1/3 of them in being laid off from their job. Good 53% are worried about being sent home, which means a loss of pay for them if the census goes down in their center. So that's a common practice in a center. We don't have so many kids today, somebody goes home. So you can't even count on your salary of $10, that's something an hour, when you work in many child care centers. Other research has shown that people are stressed or depressed because of their personal life. There are other things that could factor in here. Work climate, a lack of supportive strategies, dealing with children's challenging behaviors, and folks who work with kids who come from vulnerable backgrounds, I can't say that today, are even more likely to have greater levels of kids with challenging behavior in the classroom. So all of these things are sort of contributing to, I think, what we see sort of in Whitaker's study, where an awful lot of teachers are depressed and many of them are stressed. So that leads me to the next study that we did, which was looking at work climate, because that was one of the things that contributed to teacher stress and their depression and teacher stress. And the data for this study came from a paper and pencil survey that we did, where we had data from about a little over 1,100 preschool teachers. It was a national sample. We didn't have a great response rate, but it was a random sample. The difficulty with trying to do that with teachers, unless you have a huge federal grant to cover this, is that you can't, there's no master list of teachers that you can go to. You have to identify centers, you have to send it to a director, and hope the director will pass it on to the teacher. So in this study, what we found is that, and it was a self-report from teachers, we found that if they perceived support from parents, from families of whose children they were caring for, children's challenging behaviors, and teachers and the work climate all were related to teacher stress and their commitment to the job or to the profession that they were in. We found that teachers' emotion regulation and their coping skills, that was the process through which these things were associated. So we found that perceived support from families, when teachers perceived their work climate and support from families was more positive, they were less likely to be stressed. And when they reported better work climate and support from families, they just demonstrated a higher degree of reappraisal emotional regulation, which in the emotional regulation world is positive emotional regulation. So they were better able to regulate their emotions if they perceived that the families were supporting them and that they had a great work climate. So it impacted what they reported they were doing with kids. What we did in this case was we gave them scenarios and we gave them options of how they thought they would respond to them. Not the same as observing a teacher, but at least at this point it was the data that we could collect to begin to understand what was happening here. In a bit of an aside about this, we found that teachers who were working in nonprofit centers were less likely to report being stressed than teachers who were working in for-profit centers. So we did find a difference between profit and nonprofits in terms of what teachers were reporting. So then we looked at classroom chaos. So we're deep into things that are affecting what happens in terms of a teacher's psychological well-being. And we adapted a measure that is frequently used in the parenting literature that measures what's going on in the household in terms of the amount of chaos and dysregulation that's happening. It's a pretty simple scale. And so we adapted it so that it would apply to what happens in the classroom. And in this case, we found direct associations between child care chaos, sort of chaos in the classroom, and teachers' non-supportive reaction to children's negative emotions. So you have a kid who is, acting out. Teachers who were in a chaotic classroom, had a chaotic environment, were less likely to be able to react to that in a positive way. That matches the parenting literature. This is one of those studies where if I talk about it with my husband, who is a businessman, goes, like, why would it be different in a classroom than it would be with parents? But this was the first that somebody had tried to look at this, and this is the relationship that we found. So we do know that being exposed to continual chaotic environments sort of increases fatigue and tension. So we think that that might be the mechanism that is happening in terms of teachers not being able to regulate their emotions well in terms of the reactions to kids. Okay. So the next study, the last study that's complete at this point that I'll talk about, is where we finally got to the place where we were calling this CCAP, Teacher's Social Emotional Capacity. And we tried to look at it in terms of teachers' responsiveness to children and to their commitment to the profession. We looked at indicators of early childhood teachers' social emotional capacity, and we tried to find a factor structure. It's a little kind of more academic than the rest of the words I've been using. But we looked at, we came up with what we call psychological load, sort of their depression, their stress, their emotional exhaustion, and what coping abilities they had. We kind of looked at the coping literature, and we added that into our equation. We found that they were associated with teachers' negative reactions to children and to their professional commitment. So, yay, we found what we were looking for in that. And we also found that this reappraisal, emotional regulation, and problem-focused strategies were related to positive reactions to children's negative emotions. So if you had good coping abilities, if you were able to regulate yourself well, you were able to have positive reactions to when a child was expressing something in a negative way. So that kind of leads us to where we are now in the project that I'm currently working on. The information that we got from the paper and pencil survey was great, but the problem with it, the limitation was that it was all being reported by teachers, and we didn't have any observational data or any child data to go along with it. So currently what we are doing is we're trying to look at teachers' social emotional capacity and observe classroom quality. And the research questions that we have are here. They're all the things that you might think we might be looking at. What's the association between child care directors' professional support and teachers' social emotional capacity? Do contextual factors and teachers' social emotional capacity influence teachers' turnover? We're trying to kind of look at all the things that we have had at least some indication were important in the studies that we've done so far. We have the methods are that 5 in Baltimore, which is where Dr. Lini Jian, who's my graduate student, is now at. She's at Johns Hopkins University. And so we're doing a 2-site study here. We have a teacher survey where we'll have about 90 teachers in the study between the lead and assistant teachers. We're doing a class. That's my staff is all being trained today on the class. So I know who are here in support of me. Hopefully that's the only reason they're not here in support of me. We have parent surveys, and parents will be reporting on children's social emotional development. We are doing, we're focusing on social emotional development because that's what I'm really interested in. But we also have an observation of the kids where we're doing the social emotional evaluation of kids, and the teachers are doing that also. And then we're going to do a follow-up survey with parents, and we're also going to try to do a follow-up survey with teachers to try to capture, are you still in the field? Have you left the field? We're going to try to get a handle on stress levels, the quality that we saw, and whether they stay or whether they go. Which kind of brings me to how can we support teachers? So I've talked a lot about, all this stuff that we're trying to learn about teachers. Ultimately, what I want to know is how can we translate that into doing something to support teachers? We've sort of landed in terms of our thinking about this on the basic, we're using the basic psychological need theory. Everybody has to have a theory to guide their research, and basically this theory says there are 3 things that we all need as humans in order to have optimal development, and they are relatedness, competence, and autonomy. And so when we think about what can be done for teachers in each of these categories, competence would be all those things you would think about in terms of training and professional development. How do we help them be competent in their job? We also know that it's important for people to feel autonomy, to not feel like things are being done to them, that they have some power to control their environment. So empowering teachers to be able to make their own decisions, to let them have a role in shaping the norms where they work is important. And then we also know that as humans, it's important for us to feel related, to feel like we're part of a community. And in the virtual laboratory school that I talked a little bit about, but not very much, we have training for both direct care folks, and we have training for trainers, and we have training for managers. And we talk in that materials that we have for managers about how you can't just hope that those things happen in your center, that people feel supported, that people feel like they can make connections with each other, but that that it's your responsibility of a director of a center or any kind of child care setting to try to help promote that among your employees. And I have, if you're interested in virtual lab school, I have some fact sheets that you can grab when you leave. And the literature also, so what can help? And there's some literature, some research. In some settings, they're using mental health consultations for teachers. That's been shown to be effective. That's also, as you can imagine, a more expensive way to try to help teachers in the classroom. There's also in the nursing profession and among elementary school teachers, there's been some efforts to try to use mindfulness training, and that's been shown to have an impact in teachers' their psychological well-being. And so what we're trying to do is take those elements that we know and apply them to a training intervention that'll be self-administered for teachers. Again, Lini Jian is working on this summer. We're using the CASEL. Are you all familiar with CASEL? The Center for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. So we're using sort of that as the framework, having a couple modules, and then we plan on piloting it using the virtual laboratory school platform, where a teacher will be able to go into it, learn things that will help them in their own social emotional learning. Most social emotional learning training right now focuses on classroom management. How do I manage my classroom? How do I manage children's behavior? There's very little in it for teachers themselves. How can they manage their own emotions, and how can they support themselves? So our goal is to try to get that together, and we've already talked with the DoD. They're kind of excited about us piloting it on the virtual lab school website. I don't think I mentioned earlier the virtual laboratory school, while it's being developed for folks who are in the military, anybody can access it. So we have a, so not only if it works, I mean, we can get it built and pilot it, and then we'll have to try to get a grant to be able to evaluate it. But if it works, it will be available to anybody. So you don't have to be in the military to be able to use it. So that's sort of, that's the long-term goal of this path that I've been on in terms of teacher social emotional capacity. I thought I'd end with a quote, and I think I'm ending about when I said I would. With a quote that came from the National Child Care Staffing Study in 1989. Because we know that really great teachers in early care education settings can make a difference with kids, I think there's probably increased emphasis and pressure on them to be fabulous teachers. And so the emphasis can be an awful lot about having them trained a particular way and having them do certain things, but not as much talk about how do we make that environment so they can be healthy themselves. And so that's sort of what I've become passionate about. So I hope, if you have an opportunity to say these people should be treated better than we treat them, I hope you will say that, because I think it's pretty clear that if we want them to be creating the best environment that they possibly can for children, we have to make it a good environment for them as well. And so thanks to this fabulous team of people that I get to work with on a regular basis with this, my two former graduate students, Leanie and Rachel, who are now at Johns Hopkins and Oregon State, Sarah Lang and Krisa Muzuru, who are currently working on the virtual lab school and working on these projects with me, and then my current graduate students, Rachel and Jessica, and many undergraduates who come in and spend some time with me, and particularly the parents and kids who are willing to participate in the teachers. And that brings me to the end. This is our website, probably not up to date, because the person that used to do that for me hasn't been around lately. But if you want to try to keep track of the papers that we're putting out and the projects that we're doing, there's the site for you to go to. And I'd be happy to answer questions if you have. Made you all speechless. Yeah.
Did anything that you looked at address actual hours worked? So obviously there's an hourly wage, but oftentimes teachers are paid salary. So actual hours worked, I think, can contribute to stress levels as well. And then with that balanced with their pay, I'm just curious if anyway.
We probably have that data, but I don't know that we've looked at it. Most people who work in childcare are paid hourly, though. They're not, as opposed to like when you're working in a public school where you get a salary. They're typically paid on an hourly basis.
So childcare workers as opposed to preschool teachers, what I was thinking was preschool teachers.
Yeah, preschool teachers. We probably have that, but we haven't looked at it. That's a good question. I think that preschool teachers, let me think about that. I'm imagining most preschool teachers don't work as long hours as people who are considered child care workers. I think there's sometimes a different definition if you actually get to be labeled as a preschool teacher. Does that make sense? I think a lot of times there are preschool programs where kids are in them for a relatively short amount of time, as opposed to daycare where they may be in care for many more hours. I was just in a meeting in DC that kind of, when you think about hours, the most recent thing that came down from the Secretary of Defense is, and it's an effort to try to keep women in the military who have children, they're extending none of the child care centers in the military now will be allowed to be open less than 14 hours a day. You will have centers open till 14 hours a day. The current rules are that they have to be open 12 hours a day, and children can't be in them any child can't be in them for more than 10 hours. So we kind of anticipate that when they extend that, they're going to extend the number of hours that kids can be in care. So, you know, we've been thinking about one that's, research is not very supportive of having children in care for 12 hours a day, but you also have to think about what that does to staff. They'll have to stagger staff differently. You can't have someone work 14 hours a day every day, but I think it has implications for the amount of stress that those teachers in the classroom are going to feel when they have kids who have been there that long. Yeah.
First of all, this is amazing work. I think it's
Well, thank you.
absolutely crucially important. So thank you. One question I had, and you might not know this off the your profiles were so interesting. Do you recall what percentage of teachers were in each of your 3 profiles?
Oh, that's a really good question. And
It looks like the paper's
Don't.
in press, so we could all
it is,
use the
yeah,
paper.
yeah. And I probably brought the paper with me in my briefcase.
Okay.
Or at least I probably brought the discussion, so I probably don't have a percentage in
Okay.
the discussion section. But I can send it to you.
I'd love to.
Yeah, okay.
Piggybacking off of Laura's question, one of that high competence group,
Uh-huh.
what was really interesting is that those teachers had more experience than the other teachers, and typically experience in early childhood is negatively associated
Right.
with instruction. So I was wondering what you guys thought about that.
That's a good question too, and I'm trying to remember what we said in the paper. It actually was the opposite of what the literature typically says, which is that higher. Go back to it.
But normally
It's typically
Yeah.
switched between
Right.
education and experience, and I'm sorry, I can't off the top of my head remember what we thought about it. I have this terrible thing of when I have like 5 papers in my head, I can't remember details about any given one, but I'd be happy to send it to you.
Yeah, it's just interesting because it would be interesting to see the ranges for those different groups and
Mm-hmm.
also the training, because normally that was just different than the patterns we typically see in the literature. So.
Yeah, it is.
I have one.
Okay.
So now probably obsessed with daycare on military bases. Do people write about this other than you? I mean, this is such an interesting population of providers and kids. And I mean, you convinced me that this is a really interesting and important group. Is there a literature on these children?
Not an extensive literature. One of the things you have, one of the issues in terms of doing research with military families is that the military IRB makes anything that we deal with here look like child's play, it can take up to 2 years to get a study okayed through their IRB. I think they've been trying to work on it, but so I would imagine that probably limits the amount of research that's being done. We do know that it's one of the highest quality systems in the country. They care for almost 250,000 children every day. Every center is NIEWC accredited, so they have pretty strong ties with NACI. But they also, it's a really interesting system, and I think it'd be an interesting system for more people to understand. They will take any, all you have to do is have a high school diploma, be 18 years old and have a high school diploma, and you could be a teacher in, of course, that's not any different than a lot of child care centers. But you have 18 months to complete these 15 modules that we've turned into courses in virtual laboratory school. That's what we're doing for them, is making it all online. But you have 18 months to complete that so that you are set up to have your CPA by the time you've been there a year and a half. So they have a very sort of military, we're going to bring you in and we're going to train you. And they have training and curriculum specialists who oversee that training for folks. So it's an interesting it's a really interesting system. And and they also, some of the services more than others, they have really extensively used family care providers as well. Because when you think about people who are in the military, they may have maneuvers or some training that, they don't, it's not an 8 to 5 sort of a job. So, and you also have to think that military families don't have family around. So they are, they're here 2 years and then they're to the next place for 2 to 3 years. They move constantly. And so the child care is really critical to them because there's not other, it's not like you're someplace where you have a vast extent of friends, a network of friends or family that you can leave your kids with. I was just in San Diego. We were filming Virtual Laboratory School will have a track to train family-based care providers. So we were filming family care providers for that Virtual Laboratory School last week in San Diego. I don't always go on the filming trips, but this was the first one we were going to be doing family care providers, so I kind of wanted to be out there and see how it was going. And I'm really moved by these people who care very much about what they do. They think they're doing a service. I think many of them feel like they're doing a service to their country by taking care of the children whose parents are in the military. And they may not have great educations, but they even train the folks who will stay in their homes and take care of kids. So there's a system for those folks as well. So yeah, it's been the best project of my life, being involved with Virtual Lab School. And I really am impressed with what they do and what they try to do. But it would be a wonderful place to do a lot more research. Thanks. Yeah.
As more states and cities move towards sort of a universal pre-K model, what implications do you think your research has for policy? Because I think there's a lot of talk about how we make pre-K high quality, and it focuses a lot on children's cognitive outcomes, but not so much on teachers and their supports.
And I think that's a really good question. I hope that it has, we usually end every one of these papers on what are the implications for the practice, that we think that training for teachers has to be more integrative. It shouldn't just be focused on your instructional style. How do we make you, the best, at interacting with kids in terms of teaching them something? It should be broader. It shouldn't be about their well-being. It should be about thinking about things in a broader perspective than simply how do I make this child be able to do well. And I'm not denying that those are really important. Do well in reading and do well in mathematics. But we also need them to be social emotionally whole, and we need the people who take care of them to be socially emotionally whole as well. And I think that has implications for training, as opposed to let's have this narrow subject area that we're going to train you to the standards about X. To think about it more broadly and to think about it more holistically. That would be what I would hope somebody would